Well, welcome to everyone joining us online. Again, Diane and Linda are with me as we look at our reading for this Sunday, which comes from the book of Job. There once was a man in the land of Uz, whose name was Job. That man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. There were born to him 7 sons and 3 daughters. He had 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 donkeys, and very many servants. So this man was the greatest of all the people of the East. His sons used to go and hold feasts in one another's houses in turn, and they would send and invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. And when the feast days had run their course, Job would send and sanctify them. And he would rise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, "It may be that my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." This is what Job always did. One day, the heavenly beings came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. The Lord said to Satan, "Where have you come from?" Satan answered the Lord, "From going to and fro on the earth, and from walking up and down on it." The Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil." Then Satan answered the Lord, "Does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not put a fence around him and his house and all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But stretch out your hand now and touch all that he has, and he will curse your face." The Lord said to Satan, "Very well, all that he has is in your power, only do not stretch out your hand against him." So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. One day, when Job's sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in the eldest brother's house, a messenger came to Job and said, "The oxen were plowing and the donkeys were feeding beside them. And the Sabaeans fell on them and carried them off and killed the servants with the edge of the sword. I alone have escaped to tell you." While he was still speaking, another came and said, "The fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them. I alone have escaped to tell you." While he was still speaking, another came and said, "The Chaldeans formed 3 columns, made a raid on the camels and carried them off, and killed the servants with the edge of the sword. I alone have escaped to tell you." While he was still speaking, another came and said, "Your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their eldest brother's house." And suddenly a great wind came across the desert, struck the 4 corners of the house, and it fell on the young people, and they are dead. I alone have escaped to tell you." Then Job arose, tore his robe, shaved his head, and fell on the ground and worshipped. He said, "Naked I have come from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." In all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrongdoing. Well, there's hardly a happy story. To me, all of this seems horribly unfair, right? And there's Job doing everything that God would require, and then he loses everything, his possessions, his family, and it's all due to some contest between God and Satan over whether or not Job was really righteous or only acted that way because he had been so blessed. So the first question that I've got is, how does this text sit with your understanding of the action of God? Does God bring about calamity in the lives of people just to test them? What do you think?
Well, you want to think not.
Right?
But if I'm myself, that question does enter my head. Not that it's ever touched me. And I don't know that I've thought, wow, God made that happen, but I have posed it as a question. Why? Why did that happen to a group of people? I'm thinking specifically of the tsunami in Thailand several years ago. I mean, disasters of that magnitude. As I say, I don't think I actually think God made that happen, but I sure wish that He had raised His hand and said that's not going to happen.
Right.
Well, to be honest, when I read this, because I really wasn't familiar with this passage. And when I read it, I was kind of shocked. I thought, okay, why would God do this to his faithful servant? And I thought, God doesn't have to have this sort of competition. God rules all. Why did he even entertain the devil's taunt? That's another thing that kind of, I don't really have an answer for that. But I thought that, at least I'm not sure if it is God that brings on calamity. I even in this reading, he seems to feed into it. He doesn't
Right.
stop it. He allows it to happen. But I think that, Satan is always close at hand. I think he's waiting for the chance to bring misfortune, despair, whatever, and that um, he just, God doesn't always intervene, and that doesn't take away from my own belief that God, because what I view God as is love. God is love. And certainly, I will relate to you. I had a personal experience where it was a very painful thing that happened and within the family. And, I kept asking God, why are you letting this happen? Why aren't you doing something about that? And, that went on for a few years. And finally, I just realized, okay, there's got to be a bigger purpose here. I don't understand what it is, but as we have learned in previous Bible study, and as I've heard in sermons, just give it up to God. Let him handle it. Let him take over. So that's what I did. And, I can tell you that when you release that, even though it's still, there's pain there, still hurts, but you release it to God, I felt peace.
Right.
And, even years later, I had a bit of an answer. I had a dream, and God came to me in the dream, and he said, I did this to protect your family. So, sometimes we don't really understand why things are happening, but I find that, I do believe in God's grace, and I do believe that things will work out. Will there not be pain? Um, no, I don't believe that you can ever have everything just going swimmingly. You can't. there's the original sin, and so there's tough things that happen in life, but we can still give it up to God. And
Right.
that has helped me.
Okay. Well, thank you. One of the things that I saw when I was looking at the commentaries for today is this piece from a commentary on called "Feasting on the Word," and here it is. So, Job is described as a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil. These words are spoken by God when conversing with Satan, the adversary or accuser, who serves in the heavenly council as a sort of prosecutor. Two things are noteworthy here. Satan is not yet the diabolical opponent of God's righteous purposes, as he later appears in Jewish apocalyptic writings, including the New Testament. In this story, Satan works for God. This provides us with a clue about the mystery of God's relation to evil. Satan cannot act at all without God's permission. So, does that change anything about how we see that interaction between God and Satan? Knowing that he's not the diabolical opponent, I love that term, that he seems to be later, but that he still acts somehow with God's permission.
I'm not really sure how to view that. I see God as he is the Almighty.
Mm-hmm.
I never viewed him as sort of a game player. I don't know if that's what you want to call it, but I mean, that's to play the kind of games that the devil plays. Somebody's going to suffer.
Yeah.
And why would God allow that to happen in that kind of scenario where, it's like a test?
Yeah.
It is like a test. I'm puzzled at the game playing. I mean, the outcome of it says to me that no matter what terrible things happen, Job submitted himself to God. He felt loved by God. He didn't feel betrayed by God. And in that story, he didn't say, why me? Or, raise his hands to heaven and say, oh God, why did you let this happen to me? It kind of feels a little bit to me like in our own lives when things happen, we have the faith to trust, and we, sometimes it's human to say why me, but move quickly away from that. And I think the times when I've been faced with adversity is I've sort of comforted myself that God was there to comfort me and to help me deal with whatever happened. He wasn't there to take away the nastiness. It was with his support I'd come through in whatever way, whatever that means. But it was like having a good friend, a really good friend who couldn't stop the enemy, but he was there for you. And that's kind of what I see Job saying at the end, and saying, hey, this, bad things happen, but God is.
Yes,
And
sorry, go ahead.
And that leads us sort of into the next couple of questions, right? About, how does Job's response sit with your understanding of people? When people lose everything from actions outside of themselves, right? Do they turn to worship God with even more fervor? Is that the typical response? I mean, it might be the one that we want to give, that we expect faithful people to give, but is that the typical response?
Well, I think, when I read that story, I thought, wow, what would I do under those circumstances? And, I think most people would be distraught, suicidal. When you lose everything, including your family, that's what is left. What is left to keep you going on? And Linda, what you said earlier about, Job had strong faith, that's the conclusion that I came to as well, obviously, that he had strong faith. And even this, tragedies, that didn't waver his faith. And in my own experience, as I mentioned earlier, I thought, well, is this a test, or is it that I didn't understand God's grace in the first place? And if I look at things differently, especially after I had that dream, I realized that's why. That's why. And, until other people change in my situation, it will continue like this. But, now I rely on God. I gave it to him. I said, here, this is for you. You've got to straighten this out. I'll do my part, but just looking at things differently, that tended to increase my own faith, the depth of faith that I had. And so it's odd how that tragedy, the way might be a little bit of an exaggeration, but it was very painful, and that has strengthened my faith. So I kind of relate with Job in a way too.
Yeah, I can't help but think about the reaction of people in the last week in the United States, right? With all that's been going on, and particularly with what happened last night. When the American president left the White House and went over to that church for his photo op, at least some of the clergy, if not all, I know at least some of the clergy were out with the protesters. They were cleared off of their own church grounds with the tear gas and the rubber bullets, so that Trump could be outside for his photo op holding up his Bible. Definitely things outside of their own actions, and they didn't lose anything like Job. I mean, it's not like they lost loved ones or possessions or anything. But it would be very easy to start to complain about how awful that was, and to question why God would allow something like that to happen. Right? Here were thousands of innocents, standing there. There was no violence in the protests at that point, when all of a sudden the police and guard walked into them and moved them. I don't know that a lot of people would respond with with deeper worship.
Right.
I have a feeling my response might have been some unholy words rather than some holy ones.
Did anyone see the Michigan police lieutenant and what they did?
No.
This was, I guess, day before yesterday. So the police, they took off their helmets, they put down their guns, they took off their, what do you call those vests, you know, the
Yeah.
bulletproof vests. They took that off. The police lieutenant went down and talked to the people and said, "We are with you, and we are going to march with you." And they started cheering, and you know, he was just so eloquent in what he was telling them about, you know, understanding their position, and they did not agree with what the other police officers did to George Floyd. And so it was like day and night. Night was, you know, how the police officers treated George Floyd and ended up killing him. And here is another police force that is embracing the marchers, joining the marchers. He just, as I was watching it, I thought, wow, you know, there's still good out there in the world.
Right.
It was refreshing.
Yeah. Yeah, and George Floyd's brother, right? You know, very easily could have when he was at the spot of his brother's killing the other day, could have very easily called for vengeance. I don't think anybody would have denied him calling for that if that's what he did, but he didn't, right? And I personally at this point can't ask people to be peaceful, because I think we're seeing something that's hundreds of years in the making. We'll get to peace, I hope, but I don't think we can jump there yet. But he was asking people to you know, put things aside and respond appropriately, not with more violence. It's those are the responses we hope people would have. Part of why I think they make the news at times is because they're not the typical responses, though, right? And so
I've seen some interesting responses. Some of them, actually, one of them Josh sent to us. It was a letter that Michael McCain sent to his staff yesterday. And then you read other things. And the response that is appropriate or is helpful is not to incite people to violence, but it's also not to put rose-colored glasses on and say, well, you know, if we just understand each other. The one thing that really struck me was a very major step is some self-awareness. Where am I in this? It's so easy to say, oh, well, I don't approve. But how do we behave? What is our instinctive reaction to many things? We need to really develop some self-awareness, so that we can march bravely forward and know what we're standing for. I think in the past it's been easy to stand, and people are saying this now too about Canada. We say, oh, well, you know, we're Canadians, we're not tarnished with the same brush. Well, we are, and we need to know that and accept it, and want to be different as an individual.
Yeah. 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 I had a friend over 25 years ago, a coworker, and I haven't seen him in probably 23, 24 years. And he got pulled over with another coworker one day when they were driving a company car. It turns out the company car was leased and had been involved in a crime with a previous company that had leased it. So it was pulled over with absolutely no connection to the two guys that were in it or what they were doing. And this coworker, as soon as he saw the police, and this was in Canada, put his hands on the dashboard and told the Caucasian driver to put his hands on the steering wheel and not move. Like, don't look around, don't go for your wallet, don't go for, just answer the questions. And we had quite the conversation afterwards once they got back to the shop. And Kurt's experience was just so foreign to me. But that was his lived experience 25 years ago in Canada, that you didn't dare do something that could antagonize the police. Just a completely different world than I live in. I grew up in a small town, and when the police pulled me over, it was probably because my dad didn't answer the phone call about a Lions Club meeting. So yeah. I think wrestling with Job's story and wrestling with the loss that is told in that story is a good thing for us to develop our faith, and not just jump to putting on the rose-colored glasses and saying, well, Job, after all this, just went and worshipped God with even more fervor. I think dwelling with Job's story might give us an idea of how to move forward, because the next bit of the story isn't that all of a sudden all of those things were back for Job, right? So
Maybe not even. Sorry.
Are we going on to the next bit of the story?
No, not today.
All right.
We'll
Not
get there.
a happy ending at this point.
No. So anything else for today's session?
I don't think so.
Okay.
No, just that it's I haven't read the Bible cover to cover, and so I've read some of the scripture, but certainly not this segment. And I think people question God when they read something like this, but I think it's important to put it into your own experience. And if you've ever had a situation, how did you ultimately respond? Did it make you stronger in faith? And if not, why? Because I certainly thought, why was that happening to me? Why did I feel like it was getting, like my faith was getting stronger during such a very distraught kind of event?
Right.
So you have to think about it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for this, and we'll gather again in a couple of days and do a bit more.
Okay.
Good.
All right. Bye
See you.
now.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.